My daughter called me at 6:10 this evening because the water coming out of her kitchen faucet smelled like something had died inside the pipes. She lives 4 blocks from the lake shore in Mentor on the lake. Little bungalow, green siding, the kind of place where you can hear the waves if you leave the bathroom window cracked. She's lived there 11 months. I helped her move in. I installed the water heater myself. She said the smell started around 5, maybe a little before. She ran the tap for a while, thinking it was just sediment. Maybe a pocket of old water in the line from the summer heat. But it didn't clear. It got thicker. She said it wasn't sulfur, wasn't iron, wasn't that rotten egg thing you get sometimes with well water, even though she's on municipal. She said it smelled biological, like lake water, but concentrated, like something from the bottom. I told her to stop running it. Use bottled. I'd come check the pressure tank and the inlet valve in the morning. That was 3 hours ago. I don't think I'm going to make it to her house in the morning. My name is Tom Galick. I'm 57. I've been a plumber and pipe fitter in Lake County, Ohio, for 31 years. I'm not a broadcaster. I'm not a writer. I'm a man who knows water systems, residential, commercial, municipal, and I am sitting in my truck in the parking lot of the Willoughby Walgreens right now, recording this into my phone, because I need someone to hear what I saw tonight, what I'm still seeing. Because my daughter was right. There is something in the water, but it's not in the pipes. It's not a contaminant. It's not a boil advisory or a main break or a pressure fault. Something came up through the system, through the infrastructure itself, through every pipe, every drain, every tap connected to the Lake Erie municipal intake. And it is not going back down. I need to back up. After Mira called, that's my daughter Mira, I didn't think much of it. Water complaints are half my business. People panic about discoloration, about smell, about pressure drops. 90% of the time, it's nothing. A main got flushed somewhere. A hydrant test kicked up sediment. You run the cold tap for 10 minutes, and it clears. But then I got a second call. My neighbor, Frank Kulik. He's on the same municipal line I am, over in Eastlake. He said his shower water had gone cloudy. Not brown, not yellow. Cloudy, like milk glass. And it was leaving a film on the tile that didn't rinse off. I told him the same thing I told Mira. Run it, let it clear, call the city if it doesn't. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from a guy I did a boiler install for last March, over in Willowick. Same thing, smell, film, cloudiness. 3 calls in 30 minutes, 3 different municipal taps, all pulling from the same Lake Erie intake system through the Lake County Water Authority. That's when I stopped thinking it was pipes. I drove to Mira's. She met me at the door, and I could smell it before I got inside. That low, organic, tidal smell. Not sewage. Something older than sewage. Like turning over a rock at the waterline and pressing your nose to the mud underneath. I went to her kitchen sink, turned the cold handle. What came out was water, technically. It was liquid. It flowed. It was wet. But the texture was wrong. It was slightly thicker than water should be. Not syrup thick, just resistant. Like the molecules were holding on to each other a little harder than physics should allow. And it was warm, not hot. Her cold tap was producing water at maybe 80, 85 degrees. That's not possible from a cold municipal line in August, unless something is heating it between the main and the faucet, and nothing in her system does that. I let it run into a glass, held it up to the light. It was moving. Not flowing, not settling, moving, inside the glass. A slow, circular current with no source, pushing against the walls of the glass in a steady, repeating rhythm. I set it down on the counter and stepped back. Mira asked me what was wrong. I said I didn't know. That was the first lie I told tonight. I knew something was wrong because I'd seen that movement before. 12 years ago, I got called out to a school in Painesville. They were having problems with the drinking fountains, low pressure, discoloration, a faint smell in the main hallway. Standard stuff. I pulled the supply line off the nearest fountain and let it drain into a bucket. The water moved the same way, slow rotation, self-stirring. I called it into the county, and they sent a team out to the intake. Turned out there had been an algal bloom concentrated near the treatment inlet. Microcystin levels were elevated. The movement, they told me, was a density differential, warmer, toxin-heavy water interacting with the cooler pipe volume. That was the explanation. I accepted it. But what was in Mira's glass tonight didn't look like a density differential. The rotation was too organized, too steady. It didn't dissipate. It didn't slow down. It moved like something with a direction, not a gradient. I told Mira to stop using the water entirely. Don't wash your hands. Don't flush. Don't touch the taps. She looked at me the way she always does when she thinks I'm overreacting. One eyebrow slightly up, mouth pulled to the side, her mother's exact expression, and I said, "Please, just do this." I went outside, walked to the curb. Her street dead ends near a drainage easement that runs to the lake. I could hear the water in the storm drain under the road. It was louder than it should have been. August in Northeast Ohio is dry. There shouldn't be flow in that drain. But I could hear it, a thick, steady rushing sound, like the drain was running at full capacity. I knelt down and looked through the grate. The water in the drain was black, not dark, black, and it was moving inland, against gravity. The easement slopes toward the lake. I've worked on pipes along that grade. I know the fall. Water in that drain goes one direction, north, toward the shore. This was going south, toward the houses. I stood up, looked down the street. Every house on Mira's block had lights on. A few people were on their porches. 2 doors down, a woman was standing in her yard with a garden hose in her hand, staring at the water pooling on her lawn. It was coming up from the ground, not from the hose. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us said anything, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't sound insane. I got back in my truck at 7:15. I told Mira to pack a bag and go to her friend Steph's place inland over in Chardon. She argued. I didn't argue back. I just said, "The water is coming in the wrong direction, and I don't know why, and I want you away from the lake." She went. I started driving east along the shoreline because I needed to see if this was local. A main break, a backflow event, something explainable, or if it was spread out. I stopped at 4 houses between Mentor on the lake and Fairport Harbor. I know people on those routes, clients, friends, guys I've worked with. Every one of them had the same report. Smell, film, warmth in the cold lines. And at 2 of the houses, water was surfacing in the yard from below. Not flooding, emerging, slow, steady, pressurized from underneath, like something was pushing it up through the water table. At the 3rd house, a guy named Dale Petrovich, he's a retired pipe fitter, worked the same union I did. Dale met me in his driveway and said, "Tom, there's something in my basement." I went down with him. His basement has a floor drain, standard 4-inch residential, connected to the storm sewer. The drain cover was off, not removed, pushed off, from below. And the water coming up through the drain was thick enough to hold the shape of the pipe opening. It rose about 2 inches above the basement floor and just stayed there. A column of dark, warm, slow-moving liquid, perfectly round, standing on its own surface tension. Dale touched it, He pulled his hand back immediately and said, "It grabbed me." I looked at his hand. There was a film on his fingers, thin, translucent, slightly iridescent. It didn't wipe off. He rubbed it on his jeans, and it smeared but didn't lift. We left his basement. He closed the door. We stood in his kitchen and didn't talk for about 30 seconds. Then every faucet in his house turned on at once. I need to explain something about how Lake Erie water gets to your tap because it matters. The Lake County system pulls raw water from an intake crib about 3.5 miles offshore. The crib sits on the lake bottom at roughly 35 feet of depth. Raw water gets pumped through a submerged tunnel to the treatment plant on shore, where it goes through screening, coagulation, sedimentation, filtration, and chlorination before it enters the distribution mains. That system is closed. It's pressurized from the treatment plant outward. Water flows one way, from the lake, through treatment, into the mains, out your tap. It cannot reverse. The backflow preventers, the check valves, the pressure differential. Everything in the system is designed to make sure that what comes out of your faucet has been treated, tested, and pushed forward. What was happening tonight was not possible inside that system. Water does not come backward through a treatment plant. Water does not push itself uphill through storm drains. Water does not hold its own shape in a column above a basement floor. And yet, I drove to the Lake County water treatment plant at 8:10. The facility sits just off the Shore Road near the Route 2 overpass. There's a security gate, but I know the building. I've done contract work on their boiler and heating systems twice in the last decade. I pulled up to the gate, and there was no one in the booth. The parking lot had maybe 6 cars in it. Lights were on inside the main processing building. I could hear the pumps, the big centrifugal units that move raw water from the intake tunnel into the first stage settling basins. They were running. But the sound was wrong. The pitch was lower than it should be, and the rhythm was uneven. Centrifugal pumps don't fluctuate like that unless they're cavitating or pulling against a blockage. I walked to the intake monitoring building, a smaller structure on the lake side of the plant where the raw water first enters. The door was open. Inside, the SCADA screens were lit. Flow rates, turbidity, pH, chlorine residual, all displayed in real time. And every number was wrong. Not alarming wrong. Impossible wrong. The turbidity reading was showing a negative value, which isn't a real measurement. The flow rate was nearly triple the rated capacity of the intake pumps. The pH was oscillating between readings so fast the display looked like it was strobing. And the temperature. The raw water temperature, the water being pulled from 35 feet down in Lake Erie in August, was reading at 91 degrees Fahrenheit. Lake Erie's surface temperature in August peaks around 75. At 35 feet, it's closer to 60. 91 is not a lake temperature. That's body temperature. I stood there in that monitoring room alone, reading numbers that couldn't exist, listening to pumps that sounded like they were choking. And I smelled it again. That deep, organic, bottom-of-the-lake smell, coming from everywhere. I left the treatment plant and drove north to the actual lake shore. There's a public access point off Surfside Drive in Mentor on the lake, a little gravel lot with a path through the scrub grass to a narrow strip of beach. I've been going there since I was a kid. I parked and walked to the water's edge. It was 8:40. The sun was below the tree line, but there was still ambient light in the sky, that long blue Ohio dusk that hangs on past 9 in August. Enough to see by. The lake was still. Not calm, still. No wave action at all. Lake Erie always has some chop, some motion, especially in the evening when the thermal differential between air and surface water kicks up a breeze. But tonight, the water looked like poured resin. Flat. Perfectly, unnaturally flat. And it was closer than it should have been. I know where the waterline sits on that beach. I've watched it for 50 years. The normal summer line is about 40 feet from the scrub grass. Tonight it was maybe 20. The lake had advanced 20 feet up the beach without any storm, any surge, any wind. It had just risen. Silently. I stood at the edge and looked down. The water was dark. Not the usual gray-green of Erie. Dark brown, almost black and opaque. I couldn't see the bottom, even where it should have been ankle deep. And it was warm. I could feel the heat radiating off the surface, like asphalt in July. There was no sound. No lapping, no wave break. Nothing. I took one step closer, and the water moved toward me. Not a wave, not a surge. The entire surface edge, as far as I could see in both directions, shifted forward about 6 inches. Uniformly, like the lake had taken a breath in my direction. I stepped back. It didn't follow. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, watching. The surface was doing something I don't have good language for. It was pulsing, very slowly. A gentle, rhythmic rise and fall. Maybe an inch of vertical movement, perfectly regular, like a heartbeat visible across the entire surface of the water. And with each pulse, the waterline crept forward. An inch, maybe 2. Then it would hold. I looked left, down the shoreline toward Fairport. I could see the beach stretching east, and the waterline was advanced there too. And there were people. A few, scattered along the shore, standing exactly where I was standing, at the edge, looking down, not moving. One of them was standing in the water, up to his ankles. He wasn't moving. He wasn't reacting. He was just standing there, facing the lake, arms at his sides, perfectly still. I shouted at him. He didn't turn around. I shouted again. Nothing. The water pulsed. It was at his knees now. He hadn't moved. The water had risen around him. I got in my truck. By 9 o'clock, my phone was going constantly. Not from family, from clients, from neighbors, from guys in the trade. Word moves fast in a blue-collar community when the water does something strange, and a plumber is who you call before you call the city. Dave Majowski in Eastlake said his sump pump had been running continuously since 7, and his pit was still filling. The water coming in was warm, dark, and it was dissolving the PVC discharge line. Not corroding dissolving. The pipe was going soft, losing rigidity, like the plastic was reverting to something pliable. Janet Kovach in Willoughby said her toilet had overflowed, but what came out wasn't sewage. It was clean, warm, that same dark, clear liquid. And it didn't stop when she shut the valve. The water was coming up through the wax seal, bypassing the shutoff entirely, finding its own path. Terry Pavlik, a guy I've known for 20 years, called from his shop in Paynesville. He works on commercial boilers and chillers. He said the chilled water loop in a medical office building he services had gone haywire. The glycol in the closed loop, a sealed, pressurized, isolated system with no connection to municipal water, had been displaced, replaced. Something had gotten into a system that has no inlet. The fluid in the loop was warm, dark, and moving on its own. That's when I stopped thinking of this as a water system problem. A closed glycol loop has no path to the outside. You charge it, you seal it. It circulates forever unless you drain it deliberately. There is no mechanism by which lake water enters a closed hydronic loop. It would have to pass through welded steel, through brazed copper, through sealed gaskets, without a pressure differential to drive it, unless it wasn't following pressure. unless it was following the pipes themselves. The physical infrastructure, the network of conduits that runs through every building, every basement, every wall, and every structure connected to the grid. I pulled into the Walgreens parking lot because I needed to stop driving and think. I sat in my truck with the engine running, and I thought about the map. The municipal water system, the storm sewer system, the sanitary sewer system, the private plumbing in every home and commercial building, the hydronic loops, the fire suppression lines, the irrigation systems, the pool circulation, the industrial cooling. All of it connected, all of it made of pipe. All of it, ultimately, originating from or returning to the same body of water. Lake Erie. Every pipe in Lake County is a road that leads back to the lake. And tonight, something is using those roads in reverse. I'm going to describe what I saw at the intersection of Route 20 and Heisley Road at 9:20, and I need you to understand that I'm not a man who sees things that aren't there. I was driving west toward Mentor because I wanted to get to higher ground, further from the lake, further from the infrastructure density along the shore. Route 20 runs roughly parallel to the lake shore, about 2 miles inland. Heisley crosses it going north-south. There's a traffic light, a gas station on the corner, a strip mall with a pizza shop and a laundromat. The intersection was flooded. Not from rain, not from a main break. The water was coming up through the pavement. I could see it happening. The asphalt was dark and wet in expanding circles, 5, 6, 7 of them across the road's surface. And at the center of each circle, water was welling up through the road itself. Through cracks, through expansion joints, through the utility access points where the water mains and storm lines run beneath the surface. It was pushing through solid ground. The gas station's lot was the same. Water sheeting across the concrete, emerging from the base of the pump islands, from the expansion joints in the slab, from the seams around the underground tank access covers. The smell was overwhelming. That warm, organic, bottom water smell. The smell of a lake in a closed room. A woman was standing at one of the pumps. Her car was parked at the pump, but she wasn't fueling. She was looking down. The water was around her shoes. She looked up when my headlights swept across her, and she had an expression I recognized, because I'd been wearing it all night. Not fear, not yet. Confusion. The deep, disorienting confusion of watching something you understand perfectly, water, pipes, drainage, behave in a way that erases everything you know about it. I stopped at the light, even though it was red, and there was no other traffic. Force of habit. Through my closed windows, I could hear water moving under the road. Not the sound of a main break, that's a roar, a pressurized jet. This was a low, continuous, organic sound, like blood moving through something large. The water in the intersection was rising, slowly, steadily, the way it had risen on the beach, pulsing upward in that same rhythm, an inch per pulse, patient. And it was warm. I could see steam, actual visible vapor, rising from the surface of the water in the cooler night air. The road's surface was fogging. I looked in my rearview mirror. Behind me, back toward the lake, the road was wet as far as I could see. The streetlights reflected off a continuous sheet of dark water advancing from the north. Not rushing, spreading, the way a stain moves through fabric. I turned south on Heisley, got 2 blocks before I had to stop. A fire hydrant on the east side of the road had opened itself. Not blown open. The operating nut had turned. The caps were still on the nozzles, but water was pouring from the weep holes at the base, and from the seam between the bonnet and the barrel, and from the ground around the hydrant's berry. The hydrant was bleeding the system, deliberately, like a valve being cracked to relieve pressure from something enormous pressing against the other side. I should tell you about the sound, because it changed everything about how I understood what was happening. At 9:40, I was parked on a residential street in Mentor, maybe 3 miles from the shore, engine off. Windows cracked because the smell was less intense here and I needed air. I was trying to reach Mira. She'd texted me at 9:15. At Steph's, water here is fine. Are you okay? And I'd written back, stay there, don't use any water, we'll explain. That's when I heard it. Low, very low. Below what you'd normally register as a sound, and more what you'd feel as a pressure in your sinuses and your chest. A vibration that came up through the frame of the truck, through the seat, through my spine. Constant, rhythmic, matching the pulse I'd seen on the lake's surface and in the rising water on the roads. But it wasn't coming from the lake. It was coming from below, from the ground, from the pipe network under the street. Every plumber knows the sound of water in pipes. Water hammer, pressure surges, air pockets moving through a line, flow noise and undersized pipe. These are sounds you learn to read the way a mechanic reads engine noise. I have spent 31 years listening to water move through infrastructure. And what I was hearing was not water moving through pipes. It was something in the pipes moving itself. Using the pipe as a channel, a highway, but generating its own sound, a deep, resonant, almost subaudible vibration that traveled through the metal and PVC and copper and concrete of the buried network and radiated upward through the ground. I got out of the truck and put my hand on the nearest fire hydrant. It was vibrating, perceptibly, a steady, rhythmic tremor that matched the pulse I'd been tracking all night. I walked to the curb and pressed my palm flat against the street. Same vibration, coming from below, coming from the pipes. I walked to the nearest house and put my hand on the outside wall, near where the water service enters the building. Same vibration, stronger. The pipe was transmitting something into the walls of the house, into its frame, into its structure. Every house on the street was receiving it. Every building connected to the municipal water system, which is every building, was now vibrating at this low, steady frequency, thrumming with whatever was moving through the network beneath them. And then I heard something else. A sound from the storm drain at the corner. Not water flow, not the vibration. Something different. A wet, heavy, sliding sound. Like something large and soft dragging itself through a space too small for it, deforming to fit, pushing against the walls of the pipe as it moved. Something was physically inside the storm sewer. Not water. Something that moved through water. Something that used water the way we use air. And it was coming toward the street. I watched it emerge from the storm drain grate. I was standing maybe 50 feet away on the far sidewalk, and the streetlight was directly above the drain, so I could see clearly. I want to be precise about what I saw because I know how it sounds. The grate is cast iron, standard municipal, maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, with slots roughly 3/4 of an inch wide. Nothing larger than a rat should be able to pass through those slots. What came through them was not solid in the way I understand solids. It came up as liquid first. Dark, warm water, welling up through the grate the way it had been welling up everywhere. Slow, pressurized, deliberate. It pooled on the street surface. Maybe a 2-foot circle of dark water, an inch deep, perfectly still. Then the water changed. The surface developed texture, not ripple structure, like watching ice crystal formation in fast forward, except it wasn't crystallizing. It was organizing. The flat pool of water began to rise in the center, slowly, building upward, the way you'd pour thick batter and watch it mound before spreading. But this didn't spread. It kept rising. It gained vertical shape. In about 40 seconds, the pool of water on the street had become a standing form, roughly 3 feet tall, 2 feet wide, tapering at the top. It looked like a stalagmite made of dark water. It held its own shape. It didn't flow. It didn't drip. It stood there, solid in its surface, liquid in its movement, because it was still slowly shifting that internal circulation I'd seen in the glass on Mira's counter. But now, at a scale I could see from across the street. It stayed that way for maybe 10 seconds. Then it moved, toward the nearest house. Not fast, the speed of a person walking slowly. It didn't walk. It had no legs, no appendages, no features. It flowed across the pavement in a single coherent mass, maintaining its upright shape, leaving a wet trail behind it that steamed in the night air. It reached the lawn. It crossed the grass. It reached the house, and it went into the wall. Not through a door, not through a window, through the foundation. It contacted the concrete block of the basement wall, and it went through it the way water goes through a paper towel, absorbed, pulled, drawn into the material itself. In about 15 seconds, the entire form had entered the structure. The wet trail on the grass began to evaporate. The steam rose and dispersed. I stood there. Inside the house, the lights were on. I could see through the front window, a living room, a television on, a couch. No one visible. A normal house on a normal street at 9:50 on an August evening. Nothing happened for maybe 30 seconds. Then the lights in the house pulsed. Not flickered, pulsed. They dimmed and brightened in that same rhythm, the heartbeat rhythm. The vibration under my feet intensified. I felt it in my teeth. And then from inside the house, I heard a sound that I will not be able to stop hearing. A low, wet, resonant sound, like a whale call compressed into a small room. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. It came through the walls, through the windows, through the ground. It was the deepest sound I have ever heard produced inside a residential structure. Then silence. The lights in the house returned to normal. Whatever it was had moved through the infrastructure, surfaced, entered a home, and gone quiet. And it had done this on one street, on one block, in one town, along 40 miles of developed Lake Erie shoreline. I got back in my truck at 9:55 and turned on the radio. AM 101.00 WTAM Cleveland. The signal was there, but the programming was wrong. Instead of the usual evening talk format, there was a recorded emergency message running on a loop. Lake County Emergency Management, Cuyahoga County Emergency Management, the City of Cleveland Division of Water. The message said that a water quality advisory had been issued for all communities drawing from Lake Erie municipal intake systems, effective immediately. Residents should not consume tap water, should not bathe in or make contact with tap water, should close all faucets and shut off their water service at the main if possible. The message said the advisory was precautionary. The message said water quality testing was underway. The message said there was no immediate health risk. I turned the dial. FM 90.3, WCPN. Same advisory, different voice. FM 92.3. Same. AM 1420. Same. Every station was carrying it. I checked my phone. 37 unread messages, 12 missed calls. I scrolled through the texts. Dale, Frank, Terry, Janet, guys from the Union Hall. a cousin in Ashtabula, my ex-wife in Paynesville. The messages were all variations of the same thing. Something wrong with the water, something in the basements, something moving in the drains. And then one message from my cousin Nico, time-stamped 9:41. Tom, it's coming out of the lake. I'm on the bluff in Ashtabula. I can see it. It's everywhere on the beach. There are shapes. Ashtabula is 40 miles east of Mentor. Whatever this was, it wasn't local. It wasn't a main break. It wasn't a boil advisory. It was the entire southern shore of Lake Erie. Simultaneously, every intake, every pipe, every drain, every connection between the lake and the built environment. I thought about the numbers. Lake County alone has over 200,000 people served by Lake Erie water. Cuyahoga County, Cleveland, is over 1 million. Add Lorain, Erie, Ashtabula, the smaller systems in between. You're talking about 3 million people in Ohio alone whose homes, businesses, hospitals, and schools are connected by pipe to a body of water that has apparently decided to come inland. And on the other side of the lake, Pennsylvania, New York, Ontario, Michigan, every city on the Erie shore, Buffalo, Erie, Toledo, Detroit draws from the river, which drains Erie, Windsor. The intake systems extend across the entire basin. 11 million people around Lake Erie, all of them connected to the water by pipe. I pulled out of the residential street and headed south, toward higher ground, toward the highway, toward anything that wasn't connected. Interstate 90 runs east-west about 5 miles south of the lake shore through Lake County. I got on at the Route 306 interchange heading west toward Cleveland at 10:15. The highway wasn't empty. It was full. Both westbound lanes were packed with vehicles moving slowly, headlights stretching into the distance. That particular density of traffic that means everyone had the same idea at the same time. Get away from the lake. But the eastbound lanes were just as full. People from Cuyahoga County, from Cleveland, heading the other direction. Everyone was fleeing, and everyone was fleeing toward everyone else. I merged into the crawl. Through my window, I could see the landscape to the north, the low, flat, developed strip between the highway and the lake shore. Streetlights, commercial signs, residential windows, all of them pulsing, that same rhythm. Slow, steady, synchronized. The entire built environment north of the highway was breathing in light. The car ahead of me had its windows down, and I could hear a woman's voice, and a passenger shouting into a phone. It came out of the bathtub, Kevin. It came out of the bathtub, and it went into the wall. I'm not going back. I'm not going back there. I tried to call Mira. The call didn't connect. Not a busy signal, the call just didn't initiate. I tried again. Same result. Tried a text. The sending icon spun and spun. The cellular network was saturated. 3 million people, all trying to call someone at the same time. I kept driving. The traffic thinned slightly past the I-271 interchange as people peeled off southbound, heading away from the lake with real commitment. I thought about following them. Getting on 271, going south to Akron, to Canton, somewhere that draws its water from wells and reservoirs, not from Erie. But Mira was in Chardon. Chardon is on a different water system, the Geauga County system, sourced from groundwater, not lake intake. She should be safe. She should be fine. Unless it wasn't just following municipal intake systems. Unless it was following all water, all pipes, all infrastructure that carried liquid of any kind. I thought about Terry's glycol loop. A sealed system. No connection to the municipal supply. And it was still infiltrated. What if the path wasn't just Lake Erie municipal water? What if the path was every pipe, every conduit, every channel that had ever carried water? The entire built plumbing of Northeast Ohio's storm, sanitary, domestic, commercial, industrial, agricultural, all of it ultimately part of the same hydrological basin. All of it touching the same water table. All of it, at some geological level, connected to the lake. The vibration was still in my truck. I could feel it through the steering wheel, through the floor, through the tires touching the road surface, which touched the ground, which contained the pipes, which contained whatever this was. There is no surface in a developed landscape that is not within a few feet of a pipe. I kept driving. At 10:40, I passed the Lake West Medical Center on my left. I almost didn't look. But the parking lot was full in a way that pulled my attention, not just full of cars, but full of people. Outside, standing in the lot, some in hospital gowns, some in scrubs, visible under the sodium lights. They had evacuated the hospital. I pulled off the highway at the next exit and circled back on surface streets. I parked across the road from the hospital entrance. There were maybe 200 people in the parking lot. Staff were moving among them. There were gurneys, IV poles, wheelchairs. They had moved patients out of the building. I rolled my window down and shouted to a paramedic standing near an ambulance at the edge of the lot. He walked over, young guy, maybe 30. His uniform was wet from the knees down. I asked what happened. He said the water started coming through the floors at about 9:30. Every drain, every pipe chase, every plumbing penetration in the building began producing water. They couldn't stop it. They shut the main. They shut every valve. It didn't matter. The water was coming up through the slab, through the foundation, through the soil underneath the building. It rose to about 4 inches throughout the first floor, and then it stopped rising and just stayed. He said it was warm. He said it had that smell. He said one of the forms came out of it. In the basement. In the mechanical room. Where the main water service enters the building and branches to the boilers, the domestic system, the fire suppression, the surgical scrub lines, the sterilization equipment, the dialysis water treatment system, the most pipe-dense space in the building, the place where the most conduits converge. A form assembled itself out of the standing water on the mechanical room floor, larger than the one I'd seen. He said it was maybe 6 feet tall and 5 feet wide, and it didn't have a consistent shape. It kept shifting, reorganizing, like it was trying different configurations. And then it moved into the wall, into the pipe chase that runs vertically through the building. He said you could track it going up, floor by floor. The lights would pulse on each level as it passed through. Patients reported hearing the sound, that deep, wet, whale call resonance, moving upward through the building. When it reached the 4th floor, it stopped. The building's vibration intensified to the point where ceiling tiles were falling. The staff called a full evacuation. He said they'd been out here for 40 minutes, and nothing had happened since. The building was still standing. The lights were still pulsing. The water was still in the 1st floor, but nothing had come out. I asked him if anyone had been hurt. He said no. No one had been injured. No one had been touched. The forms he'd heard reports of multiple forms now, across the city, didn't seem to interact with people. They moved through infrastructure, through pipes, through walls, through foundations. They entered buildings, and they stayed. He said it was like they were moving in. I thanked him and left. That phrase stayed with me. Moving in. Not attacking, not consuming, not destroying, occupying. At 11:15, my phone finally connected a call. To Mira. She answered on the 2nd ring, and the sound of her voice did something to me that I'm not going to try to describe because I'll lose my composure, and I need to stay clear right now. She was at Steph's in Chardon. The water there was fine, clear, cold, normal. No smell, no film, no vibration. Whatever was happening was still concentrated in the lake-connected systems. Chardon's groundwater was clean. She said she'd been watching the news. Cleveland's local stations were broadcasting continuously. Anchors who looked like they hadn't slept, standing in studios with emergency graphics that kept expanding in scope. It wasn't just Lake County. It wasn't just the Ohio shore. Toledo was reporting the same thing. The entire western basin of Erie, the Maumee River watershed. Water coming up through infrastructure, forms assembling, entering buildings. Buffalo, the eastern basin. Same reports, same timeline. Starting around 7-8 p.m. Eastern. Erie, Pennsylvania. Dunkirk, New York. Sandusky, Lorraine, Vermilion, Huron. Every community on the American shore. And then the Canadian side. Port Colborne, Port Stanley, Leamington. Pelee Island had gone completely dark, no communications at all from an island sitting in the middle of the lake. Mira said the news had shown aerial footage from a helicopter over Cleveland. The lakefront was unrecognizable. The water had advanced over the breakwalls, over Edgewater Park, over the flats, into the warehouse district. Not flooding, occupying. A dark, flat, warm sheet of water covering the low-lying areas, pulsing with that rhythm, steaming in the night air. And standing in it, visible from the air, hundreds of forms. Dark vertical shapes, evenly spaced, motionless, distributed across the submerged landscape like monuments. She asked me where I was. I told her I was on the road south of the hospital, heading for higher ground. She asked me to come to Chardon. I said I would. I said I was on my way. But I didn't go to Chardon. I went back to the lake. Because I'm a pipe fitter. I've spent my whole life understanding how water moves through the systems. And what was happening tonight was the most important thing that would ever happen in my field of knowledge. And I could not drive away from it. Mira, if you hear this, I'm sorry. I had to see. I reached the Mentor Headlands parking area at midnight. The Headlands is a state park beach, long, wide, open, one of the best stretches of public shoreline on Lake Erie. I've been coming here my whole life. My father brought me. I brought Mira. It's the place where I learned what a lake is. I don't know what it is anymore. The parking lot was empty. The access road was barricaded orange barrels. A police cruiser parked sideways with its lights on, but no one inside. I drove around the barrels. No one stopped me. No one was there to stop me. I parked at the far end of the lot, closest to the beach access path. Killed the engine, killed the lights, sat in the dark. I could see the lake from the lot, or what had been the lake. The water had advanced past the beach entirely. The sand was gone, submerged under a flat, dark, glassy surface that extended from the tree line at the back of the beach to the horizon. The lake had moved maybe 300 feet inland from its normal shore, and it was still pulsing. That slow heartbeat rise and fall, visible across the entire surface, synchronized, patient. The forms were there, dozens of them, standing in the shallow water between the tree line and where the old water line used to be. Spaced roughly 20 to 30 feet apart, arranged in rows that followed the contour of the original shoreline. Each one was slightly different in size and shape, but they all shared the same basic character: vertical, dark, fluid in surface texture but solid in structure, between 3 and 7 feet tall. They were motionless. Not dormant, I could see the internal movement, the slow circulation within each form, catching the faint light. They were still and active at the same time, the way a heart is still when it's in your chest, fixed in place, never stopping. I got out of the truck. The air was thick, warm and humid, but not summer humid. It was a different quality of moisture, heavier, richer, carrying that deep biological smell so strongly that I tasted it. It coated my tongue and my throat. I breathed through my mouth, and it didn't help. The ground under my feet was wet, not puddled, saturated. The soil in the parking lot was holding as much water as it could contain, and the excess was sheeting south, away from the lake, in a thin, slow-moving film that caught the light from the abandoned police cruiser's flashers. I walked to the edge of the lot. Ahead of me, the access path descended gently through low scrub to the beach. The water had claimed the path about halfway down. It lapped softly against the scrub brush, the only sound it was making. A gentle, almost domestic sound, like a bathtub filling. The forms didn't react to my presence. I walked down the path until my boots touched the water. It was warm. Of course it was warm. Everything tonight was warm. I stepped into it. I am recording this. I want that fact to be clear. I am standing in water up to my shins in the parking lot approach of Mentor Headland State Park at 12:20 a.m., and I'm describing what I feel. The water is warm, warmer than the air. It feels dense. I keep coming back to that word because it's the right one. It's water that's been thickened by something. Not particulate, not chemical, something structural. Like the water itself has been reorganized at a level I can feel but can't see. It's moving against my legs. Not current, the surface is still flat. But underneath, the water is pressing against me from multiple directions, simultaneously, gently, with that pulse. I feel it the way you'd feel someone's hands if they pressed very lightly on your calves, your shins, the sides of your knees. A distributed, even exploratory pressure. It's not unpleasant. That's what frightens me. The nearest form is about 40 feet away. It hasn't moved. It's standing in water that's maybe 2 feet deep where it is, so it's rising about 5 feet above the surface. I can see it clearly. The surface of the form is in constant motion, not turbulent, not chaotic, but organized. Patterns moving across it like weather fronts on a sped-up satellite map. Dark bands that sweep from the base to the top and then dissolve, replaced by new patterns rising from below. I take another step. The water is at my knees now. The pressure increases, not painfully, but proportionally. More of my body is in the water, so more of me is being touched. The pulse is stronger here. I feel it in my bones. It's the same frequency I've been tracking all night. The vibration in the pipes, in the street, in the walls of the houses. But here, at the source, it's not a vibration. It's a communication. I know how that sounds. I'm a plumber, not a mystic. But I work with pressure every day. I read pressure the way a doctor reads a pulse. And what I feel in this water is not random, not mechanical, not a simple physical phenomenon. It's structured, it's varied, it's responsive to my presence. When I shift my weight, the pressure pattern changes. When I stand still, it returns to its baseline rhythm. It is reading me. The same way it read the pipes, the same way it followed the infrastructure. It entered the network, mapped it, traveled through it, surfaced where the density was greatest, and formed itself where it found open space. That's plumbing logic. That's what water does in a system. It finds the path. It fills the void. It equalizes pressure. But water doesn't choose. This chose. I stand in the lake for maybe 5 minutes. The water doesn't rise further around me. The pressure stays constant. The pulse keeps going. And I feel something I did not expect. I feel known. Not watched, not scanned. Known. The way a building knows you when you've worked in its walls, when you've traced every pipe, every fitting, every joint. You know that building, and it knows what you did inside it. The lake has been inside every pipe in this county tonight. It knows the infrastructure the way I know the infrastructure. It knows us from the inside. I walked back to my truck. I dried my legs with a shop rag from behind the seat. The film was on my skin, that same thin, iridescent sheen Dale had on his hand, and it didn't wipe off. I stopped trying. I sat in the cab and watched. Over the next hour, the forms changed. Slowly, the way everything tonight has been slow, they began to connect. The ones closest to each other extended lateral branches, horizontal projections of the same dark, organized liquid that reached across the 20-foot gaps between them and joined. The connections held. They solidified into beams, into struts, into what I can only describe as structural members. By 1:30, the forms on the beach were no longer individual columns. They were a framework, a lattice of dark, fluid architecture rising from the surface of the advanced lake, interconnected, symmetrical, and growing upward. It looked like scaffolding, or a foundation, the skeleton of something being built. And inland, behind me, I could hear the same sound from the houses, that deep resonance intensifying, coming from multiple structures simultaneously. The forms that had entered the buildings were doing the same thing, connecting, networking through the walls, through the pipe chases, through the infrastructure that already linked every building to every other building. The system was becoming one system. I tried to reach Mira again. The call went through this time. She answered immediately. I told her what I was seeing. I described the lattice on the beach, the framework being built. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, the news is showing this from everywhere. Cleveland, Toledo, Buffalo. It's the same pattern everywhere. They're building something along the entire shore." I asked what the news was saying it was. She said no one was saying what it was. The emergency management people were repeating the water advisory. The governor had activated the National Guard. FEMA was staging in Akron. But no one was offering an explanation, because there was no explanation available. She said one scientist from Case Western had been on camera, a limnologist, and he'd said something that stuck with her. He said Lake Erie is the shallowest of the Great Lakes, average depth 62 feet. It's also the warmest, the most biologically productive, and the most stressed by human infrastructure, intake pipes, discharge pipes, agricultural runoff, industrial outfall. More pipe per mile of shoreline than any freshwater body on the planet. He said if something in the lake had been mapping the human network, learning the infrastructure from the inside, Erie would be the logical starting point. The most connections, the most pathways, the most points of entry. He said he didn't know what it was. He said it was very clearly alive. He said it had been in the lake for a long time. That's the part that keeps circling in my mind. Not where it came from, but how long it's been there. Under the water I've worked with for 31 years. In the system I thought I understood completely. I stayed at the headlands until 4 a.m. During those hours, the lattice grew. It's now maybe 40 feet tall at its highest points, extending along the shoreline in both directions as far as I can see. It's not crude. It's not random. It has an architecture-repeated patterns, proportional relationships between vertical and horizontal members, a logic to the spacing that suggests function, not accident. It is building something specific, and it is doing it across the entire lake shore simultaneously. The water continued to advance inland. By 3 a.m., it was in the parking lot. My truck is on the highest point of the lot, and I'm sitting in it now, watching the water creep slowly toward my tires. It's about 10 feet away. Still pulsing, still warm. The forms in the water have merged entirely into the lattice. There are no more individual columns. It's all connected. One structure, one organism expressed as architecture. And it's still growing, not just upward, but downward, extending into the lake, reaching towards something beneath the surface that I can only sense through the deepening vibration. In the ground. My phone has been dead for an hour. Not the battery, the network. Cellular towers are on the grid. The grid runs on infrastructure. The infrastructure is occupied. The radio still works. AM, anyway. The emergency loop has changed. It's not the water quality advisory anymore. It's a different message from a different authority. FEMA, I think. It says, residents within 5 miles of the Lake Erie shoreline are advised to evacuate inland immediately. This is not a drill. Do not attempt to interact with, touch, or approach any standing water. Do not enter any structure that shows signs of water intrusion. Proceed to designated shelters south of State Route 2. 5 miles inland. That's most of Lake County, most of Cuyahoga, most of the developed shore. They're evacuating the lakeshore. Millions of people. At 4 a.m., I watched something I don't have an adequate way to describe. The lattice, the entire visible structure along the shoreline sun pulsed. Not the gentle heartbeat pulse from earlier. A single, massive, coordinated contraction. Every element of the lattice pulled inward simultaneously, compressing, tightening, and then releasing. The vibration that resulted was so deep and so powerful that my truck rocked on its suspension, and I felt it in my chest like a drum hit. After the pulse, the lattice was denser, tighter, more solid, less fluid, more structural, as if it had cured, set, hardened from liquid architecture into something permanent. And from deep beneath the lake miles out, fathoms down, something answered. A sound I felt more than heard. Something immense, shifting in the deep water. Waking up. I've been thinking about this all night from the wrong direction. I've been thinking about it as a plumber, as an infrastructure problem. Something got into the pipes. Something is using the system against us. Something is invading through the water network. But that's not what's happening. We built the pipes into the lake. We pushed our infrastructure into its body. Intake cribs drilled into the lake floor. Discharge pipes pumping treated sewage back into its water. Industrial outfalls, thermal pollution from power plants. Agricultural drains carrying phosphorus and nitrogen into its basin until it chokes on algae every summer. We have been piping into it for 150 years. Every conduit, every intake, every outfall, we built those connections. We built the road. We put the network in place. We reached into the lake, and we never considered that the lake might reach back. This isn't an invasion. It's a reply. I think about the forms. They didn't attack anyone. They didn't hurt anyone. At the hospital, no one was injured. On the streets, the forms moved around people, through infrastructure, into buildings. They didn't break doors. They used the paths we already built. I think about the film on my skin from standing in the water. It's still there. In the dim light of my truck cab, I can see it, that faint iridescence on my calves, my hands where I touch the shop rag. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't itch. It just is. A residue, a mark of contact. I think about what I felt in the water, that sense of being known, the pressure that responded to my movement, the pulse that synchronized with my stillness. I think about the lattice on the shore, and the sound from the deep. And I think that what is happening tonight is something the lake has been preparing for since we put the first pipe into its body. It learned the network. Inch by inch, year by year, it mapped every connection we built. It followed the water into every home, every building, every system. It learned us from the inside out, our architecture, our infrastructure, our patterns of habitation, the shape of our need. And tonight, it used that knowledge to build something. Not a weapon, not a wall, a structure, a framework along the shore, following the exact contour of our development, matching our footprint with something of its own. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it's for. I don't know if it will stop at the lakeshore or keep advancing until every pipe in every basin connected to every body of water on the continent is part of the network. But I know this. We connected ourselves to it. Every pipe we laid was an introduction. Every intake was a handshake. Every drain was a conversation we didn't know we were having. And tonight, the lake decided to answer. 5 ram. 12 a.m. The sky is lightening in the east. The water has reached my tires. I can feel the warmth of it through the floor of the truck. The vibration is constant now. Not pulsing, not rhythmic, just present. A sustained note. The deepest sound I've ever experienced, made physical, running through everything. The lattice stands against the pre-dawn sky like a new skyline. 40, 50 feet high in places, stretching in both directions along the shore, dark and solid and permanent. Steam rises from its surface. It's beautiful. I don't want it to be beautiful, but it is. In the lake, beyond the lattice, the water is doing something I can barely make out in the low light. The surface is rising. Not evenly in specific locations, at regular intervals, the water is mounting upward into new vertical forms, larger than anything that came ashore last night. Much larger. I can see the silhouettes against the horizon broad, towering shapes pulling themselves out of the lake's flat surface, taking form, taking their time. Whatever came ashore last night was the advance, the scout, the first word of a sentence that is still being spoken. The lake is still speaking. I'm going to drive south now. The water's not deep enough to stop me yet. I'm going to get to Chardon, to Mira, to higher ground. I'm going to hand her my phone with this recording on it, and I'm going to ask her to make sure someone hears it, because I need people to understand what I understand now. What 31 years of working with water in this county taught me to see when I finally stopped thinking like a plumber and started listening like a pipe. We are the infrastructure. We built the connections. We laid the network. We drilled into the lake and ran our systems through its body, and we called it a water supply, a utility, a service. But a pipe runs both ways. A connection has two ends. And we never once considered what was on the other end, learning, waiting, building toward this night. Whatever is in Lake Erie came ashore tonight. It used our own system to get here, and I don't think it's done. My name is Tom Gallick. It's 5:15 in the morning on the shore of Lake Erie. The water is rising, and the lake is full of shapes. If you can hear this, stay away from the pipes. This is a note I'm adding later. It's about 8:30 a.m. I'm in Chardon, at Steph's kitchen table. Mira is sitting across from me. She hasn't let go of my hand in 20 minutes. The National Guard established a perimeter along State Route 2 at dawn. No one gets within 3 miles of the lake. They have no explanation. No one has an explanation. The governor held a press conference at 7 and said the word unprecedented 4 times and the word investigation 6 times, and nothing else that meant anything. The lattice is visible from satellite imagery now. The news is showing it. It runs the entire southern shore of Lake Erie from Toledo to Buffalo. Unbroken. 650 miles of dark architecture standing in the water along the edge of the advancing lake. The Canadian shore has the same structure. The lake has built a frame around its own perimeter, following the exact contour of human development. There are reports of similar activity beginning on Lake Ontario, on Lake Huron, on the river systems connecting them. The network is spreading. The infrastructure extends beyond Erie, and whatever learned the system in Erie is following the connections outward. Chardon's water is still clean, groundwater, no lake connection. But every pipe in this house comes from somewhere. And somewhere, if you trace it far enough, it connects to a system that connects to a system that connects to the water. Mira just asked me if I think it will reach here. I told her I don't know. That's the truth. I don't know where it stops. I don't know if it stops. But I'll tell you what I do know. I know pipe. I know connections. I know how water moves through a system. And what I know, what I feel in my bones and in the film still shining on my skin, is that this was never an if. We laid the pipe. We completed the circuit. This was always the other end of the line, picking up. End transmission.